Thank you for having me. This is a great honor. I think one of the things that's so awesome about COVID, so many great things. One thing that's really good is that we actually get to do these things. I mean, this would have been impossible otherwise. I did a couple other keynotes today, and I would have been in Washington, I would have been in Colorado, and here we are doing this. How awesome is that? Let's look at the positives, right? So that's really good stuff. Yes, I am happy to be here with you. I saw there was a lot of people. Some of you, I actually think I remember and saw earlier today, and I'm really impressed. I did a keynote about 9 hours ago, and I think I see some of you here. So you might be disappointed because I'm actually doing the same keynote, but still, hey, if you want to see it again, that's awesome. I'm also very impressed that you're still up after 9 hours. So great job, and that's passion for you. I love it. So what we're going to talk about today is unlocking agility at the enterprise level, and this is a topic that I am very, very passionate about. And before we start, I want to see how passionate you are about this. And to do that, hey, we're doing this. We have to do a Mentimeter, right? There's no virtual presentation without that. So I'd like to get your opinion. Just go to menti.com and type in 5237-849, 5237-849, and just type in your own words. There's no profanity filter. Type in what are the first thoughts that come to mind when you hear the two words agile transformation. And I recognize that could be like a red cloth to a bull, but still, I'd like to hear what you think when you hear these. Oh, look at that theater! This is going to be good. I can already tell that there's a passionate group of people here. This is going to be great. All right, buzzword. Expensive garbage. Wow, look at this. Ways of working. Failure. Painful. Marketability. Okay. Circus. That's a good one. Complex. Anxiety. Yes. Command and control. All right. That wasn't exactly what I was thinking. Authoritative. Agile. Okay. Implies an end. Okay. Good thing. I see what you're saying. Teamwork. Magic. It could get magic. Yeah. If you do it right, it can be quite magical. Resistance. Yeah. These are great comments. This is not atypical from. So typically when I do this talk and I ask this question, what do you typically see as sort of a dichotomy? You see a lot of people who just like hate it. I mean, just viciously hate it, and then you have some people on the right hand side who actually thinks it's quite awesome and quite beautiful. And right now, I have to say there's probably a little bit of a I think there's a little bit more on the negative side at the moment. And hey, I don't blame you. I don't blame you because there's a lot of bad agile out there, and I don't blame you for that. But I'm here to tell you that there is such a thing as agile transformation, and it can happen, and it can be beautiful. It truly can change the way organizations work, and when it does work, it is an awesome thing to behold. And I think this is part of the curse, I think, for some of us, and there's not that many who have gone through successful transformations, and I'm not saying gone through and it's done, gone through and continuing to see it. Those of us who have been there, who've seen it, we have seen what difference it makes, not just in business outcomes like speed and quality and even customer satisfaction, but the difference it makes to people, how humane those organizations are, how inspiring it is to work there. It truly is a completely different way of working. And that's why it is a transformation. A lot of people say, I don't like that word. But honestly, I don't know another word for it. It's a totally different organization. You cannot recognize those two organizations from when they started that journey until they're actually successfully doing it. So I'm here to tell you that, yes, this can happen. And yes, there is a lot of hype around it. But truly, when you do it and when you make it happen, it's a beautiful thing. It is absolutely worth doing. So this is going to be a good story, I think. It says the co-host has asked me to start my video. I'm not sure what that is.
I think we lost seeing you, so there are comments in the chat. So
no, I'm actually just going to have this on in the meantime while I talk, because I have my screen at the other side, so you'll just see my ear.
Not a problem.
If that's okay. Thanks anyway. So part of what this book is about is a reality check. It's essentially saying, hey, you know what? I've been leading large transformations at Nokia. I did the same thing at McAfee. I did it at Intel, and a lot of these were quite successful. And the thing that bothered me the most was when consultants came in and said, "Hey, let us help you do this," and they would come up with these fancy PowerPoints, and everything would look just perfect. And they didn't stay around when things went to hell. So that's the kind of stuff that I wanted to prevent. This book is about reality. It's about practical realness when it comes to agile transformations. And that's what I want to sort of talk to you about today, because this is something I don't think we are well served not talking about agile transformation. Because as we probably have noticed, things have changed. The world is it's changing, isn't it? And the clock speed of business is accelerating. This is not one of those hype things. You know, when people talk about change is the only constant, they'll say, well, that's always the case. Well, you know what? Yeah, fair enough. Yes, it was always the case, but not to the degree that it is today. I mean, if you go back, say, 10,000 years, go back to the cavemen, and you looked at how they were doing back then, and you say, ah, cool, they got a cave, they got some fire they invented, that's beautiful, and you got some interesting scribbles on the wall. Then you fast forward 2,000 years, and then you say, what has changed in those 2,000 years? Not a whole lot. They still have the fire, they still have the scribbles, not a whole lot changed in those 2,000 years. If you look at what's been happening in the last 100 years, amazing amount of change. Go back to the last 50 years, go back to the last 20 years. Lots of change have happened, and it is happening at an accelerating pace. So this is not just political, it's business. Well, hey, pandemic has changed a few things too, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that this is not something that we can just avoid. We can't just say, it's not so important to be more agile. This is critical if we want to continue to be in business. So the clock speed of business is accelerating. Our existing systems are not set up. Our existing management theories, our existing ways of operating are not optimized for this way of working. So this is a term that I bet you have heard 100 times, VUCA, came up from the US War College. I thought it was an interesting term that they came up with themselves. I think that was interesting in terms of the war theaters that they were fighting. They said to themselves, hey, you know, the way of having the perfect plan and then fighting in war theaters is not enough. What you need to do is actually be able to change quicker. There is so much volatility. There is uncertainty in the way we operate. These are complex environments when there is no clear cause and effect, and the ambiguity keeps growing. So what we're seeing is that there's an enormous amount of VUCA in our environments, not just in the business environments, but in the world in itself. And what this is starting to do is it's fundamentally changing where Agile now is coming from. You know, yes, it was invented, if you want to call it that, in 2001. That's the Agile Manifesto, 17 wonderful gentlemen sitting there coming up with these wonderful 4 values and 12 principles. And we love this. But what is happening though is that this is no longer a technical thing. Let's be honest, they came at this from a software development, from a computer science perspective. This is no longer a technical thing. This is a human thing. This is very much an organizational thing. There is no longer a sustainable competitive advantage. We're realizing that change is not optional. There is no moat. There is no sustainable competitive advantage you can create because the barriers of entry are so small. And executives are getting this. They're getting this. They're seeing now that organizational agility is critical for their survivor. What's really interesting is when McKinsey did a survey, this is like about a year ago, which kind of feels like 2 decades ago, but it was about a year ago. And they sent out a survey to their clientele, which tons of executives, and they said, what is the number one thing that keeps you up at night? And this was the thing that popped up: organizational agility. And so what's starting to happen now is that the conversation is going up a few levels. It used to be a thing where we talked about XP and Scrum and Kanban and all these things, which I think are really important, and that's great at the team level. What we're starting to understand now is that this is an organizational level thing that we need to worry about. And what's really great about all of this is that there are some excellent examples of Agile working at scale. I mean, yes, among all the doom and gloom, there's some really great examples. Because if you do this right, the organizational physics will actually help us. Because if you reduce work in progress, if you reduce variability where it matters, you decrease cycle time, you are going to see some significant changes. Look at faster execution, for instance. This is a company I work with directly. It's called Here. It's an organization based in Belgium. Sorry, Berlin is where their headquarters is now. They've changed. Used to be called Navtech. What they do is digital maps for cars, for automotives. Right now, they have 4 out of 5 cars in the industry today are using their maps. They were able to go from 36 weeks to 6 weeks in terms of getting to from concept to cash. I mean, that's significant from 36 weeks to 6 weeks. That's real value right there. So that's what Here was able to do. Here's ING. This is a company you probably heard of. Lots of talk around their transformation. What they were focusing on was customer retention, and what they were able to do was increase that by 30%. That's significant. I mean, we all know how expensive it is to retain your customers. If you could increase that by 30%, that's significant. ING was able to do that. So they're now broadening that transformation, by the way, to all their departments across the world. Equinor, this is an example I like to use sometimes because I think what they did was really important. They decided to do less of all the things and more of the things that really matter. So they looked at things like cost of delay and they started to say, let's do a little bit less of the things that don't matter so much and more of those that do. And what they were able to do was get to the point that in the next 2 years, they are now on track to have the same combined profits as they did in the previous 17 years. Just chew on that. I mean, in the next 2 years, they are on track to have the same amount of combined profits that they did in the previous 17 years combined. That tells you what a difference that makes. So don't tell me that this doesn't have an economic impact. And here's one of my favorite examples. I used to work for Nokia. I have a lot of respect for that company. A lot of my heart goes there. I still bleed Nokia blue. The thing about what happened in Nokia, of course, was quite tragic, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But they were a very agile company. I'll explain what that means in terms of what they did for their business. One of the things that they were struggling with as they transformed from a mobile phone company to more of a 5G company, which is where they are now, and one of the leaders in that technology, is that they were losing people. People didn't want to work there anymore. They wanted to work for Google and Facebook and all those cool companies. So what Nokia did was they said, "Hey, you know what, let's just focus more on our people and let's be more humane." They focused on employee engagement. And by doing that, they were able to retain their people at a much greater degree than before, even though they were losing market share and even though they weren't as cool as before. And I think that's really important. When you're losing market share and you're no longer a cool brand, it's really easy to lose good people. And Nokia was able to retain those people because they focused on those employees that were left. So don't count Nokia out, by the way. It's a 150-year-old company. It used to do rubber boots. I think we'll see them again with 5G real soon. So good examples. There's lots of these, by the way. When you do agility, when you actually do this right, there's some significant benefits. But let's be honest, this doesn't always happen. In fact, most of the time, these types of effort fail. Really, what's happening most of the time, around 70 to 75% of these large change efforts fail miserably. And here are the 3 main reasons I have seen it fail. Number one, and I think actually Pete Behrens talked about that in his previous talk, lack of executive commitment. I mean, if you don't have a leader, if you don't have leadership that actually supports this effort, it's not going to work. I'll just be totally honest with you. And I'm not talking about VP level leadership, I'm talking about C level leadership. The reason for that is that the kind of changes we're looking at here, if we're going to go beyond surface level, we're talking real changes, drastic changes to every single part of the organization. There's not a single part of the organization that isn't going to be affected to some degree. So that means you need executive support to do this right. So that's the first thing I see. If you don't do that, that's going to be a key reason it will fail. Number two, and this one, I think we're very much guilty of this very often, believing we're done. What do I mean by that? Well, let's think of it this way. So let's say you are sort of a waterfall organization. You put in some WIP limits, you put in some Scrum boards, you start visualizing your work. Maybe you do a little bit more of automation frameworks. What's going to happen if you do those things? You know what? You're going to actually do a little bit better, actually quite a bit better. You will start to see benefits in terms of speed to market. Your quality will probably go up. You will actually see some benefits right away. And when that happens, well, a lot of people get seduced by that success. And when they get seduced, they say, hey, that's it. We're done. We're agile. That wasn't that hard. That's that first level of agility. It's very easy to be seduced by those first early encouraging results and think you're done. We know better, right? Agile is not something you become, it's something you become more of. We know that. But very often when you start your agile journey, that initial success can actually be quite seductive and you can actually start sort of thinking, oh, okay, we got this now. We got this. That's the beginning to the end. Here's another thing that I see. Failure to show meaningful progress. And what I mean here is not progress as in numbers of people trained or NPS scores of our coaching or things like that. What I'm talking about is progress towards the goals of the transformation. Why are we doing Agile in the first place? You're not doing Agile because it's cool. You're not doing it because your neighbor does it or because your competition does it. You do it because it is solving a particular problem. Maybe it's speed to market, maybe it's quality, maybe it's customer retention, maybe it's adaptability, whatever it is. Agility can help in those areas, but be clear on whether or not you're making progress towards that business goal. We don't do that very well. I think as agile coaches, we need to take some criticism here because very often what we talk about is velocity and stuff like that. Doesn't really matter. What really matters is agile helping us meet the goals of our business challenges? That's the point. And that's what we need to show because if we don't, once you get past that little, well, let's call it the honeymoon period, then people are going to ask, what does these agile coaches cost us again? And all this training, why are we doing that again? Remind me. Well, that's when you need to show them. Well, here's why we do this. We actually reduced speed to market, well, increased speed to market and reduced time to market. And here's some of the reasons why we did it and how we were able to accomplish it and what we can do next. These are the kind of things we need to be able to answer, but very often we don't. Okay, those are the reasons we fail. But hey, this talk is supposed to be positive, and it's going to be positive. This is a talk about the signs that show that you are on the path towards unlocking agility. These are the very, very real, concrete things you can look at right now, and you can ask yourself, are we doing this? And if we're not doing this, you can say, what is going on here? Why are we not seeing these signs in our organization? Because if you're not seeing these signs, I think that is a very good point and a very good view that you might not be on the right track towards agility. Because all the organizations I work with are doing these kind of things. That's part of their journey. And I'll show you what those are. Very concrete things that you can ask yourself in your team. So let's get right to it. Here's the first one. This is the first question I ask when I do my coaching with executives, when I do workshops at the leadership level. I always start with this question. Would you rather be right or would you rather be successful? And I tell you, this is not a very easy question for them to answer. Very often, especially if they want to be honest, it's not so easy to answer because the thing is very often they're rewarded for being right. They're being hired for being right. Their entire career has been based on being right. So they have a lot on stake here if they're wrong. Now, of course, in an environment of lots of variability and uncertainty, you can't always be right. Being successful is what we're looking for here, but that isn't always the case. So ask that question and look at that as a sign. Would you rather be right or successful? See if your executives can actually answer that honestly. Here's an example from an executive that I worked with. Stephen Elop, CEO of Nokia from 2010 to 2014. Great guy, came straight from Microsoft, supposed to be the savior of Nokia. Uh, really wonderful to work with, very articulate, very smart. But he came up with a very clear strategy for what was going to happen at Nokia. We were going to implement Windows Phone. We were going to use an operating system by Microsoft called Windows Phone. We're going to get rid of Symbian, which is what we were using, and we were going to go all in. We were going to burn the bridges. I think he even wrote a memo called the Burning Platform memo. You can look it up if you like. It's quite the interesting note. What he did is he said, basically, we're not going to look back. We're just going to go forward and we're going to go Windows Phone all the way. And that's what we did. So we did that. We started to make some progress, but we are an agile company. So as we were doing it, we started to get some data coming back. We started to see some results. And those results were not great. We were seeing that market share was dropping in all of the critical markets. We were doing pretty good in Africa, some of the areas of India, but we really weren't doing so great in North America and in Europe. So we were starting to see what is happening here. And what we found is that the problem was not with the phones. The phones was actually quite awesome. You could throw them against a bulldozer and they'd be fine. The Problem was the ecosystem. Windows Phone did not have an ecosystem with apps. It did had a couple of apps here and there, but it didn't have Instagram. It didn't have your local banking app. It didn't have a lot of those basics that iOS and Android had. So we weren't getting a lot of uptake. Now, this is good data. When you have that kind of data, this is a chance to pivot. So we talked to Stephen about this, and he just said, nope, we're going to stay the course. We're going to stay the course and go Windows Phone all the way. And that's what we did in 2010 with 45% market share. We stayed the course until 2014 when we had 3% market share. So we took that all the way down to 3%, and then he was fired and he got a parachute of $25 million, but that's a different story. Stephen Elop wanted to be right. He wanted to be right, and he didn't care so much whether or not it was successful. He had a strategy, and he wanted to stick with that strategy. That's why he was hired. Contrast this with Donna Potts McKinsey. She was the head of HR at Navtech in here when they were doing their agile transformation. You know, imagine this. You're doing an agile transformation. HR is going to be affected, right? You know this. New roles, new compensation schemes, new ways of rewarding people, career paths. I mean, lots of changes will happen when you do a transformation like this. Donna was scared. She told me, Jorgen, I am not sure what to do here. This is things that I've never really done before. This is very different. And I'm supposed to now go in front of 200 people of my peers and tell them about our transformation. What am I supposed to say? I just told her, Donna, just be honest with them. Tell them exactly what you feel right now, because I bet you're probably not the only one. And I tell you, she was so articulate. She went up on that stage, 200 people looking at her, looking for her direction around how HR was going to be agile. And what she said was this: I am on this journey with you. I am fully committed to making sure HR supports an agile transformation at Naptech right here. But I can't tell you exactly what it looks like. I don't know exactly what it will be, but I will learn and I will grow. And as I do that, we will do this together on this journey. And it was amazing. It changed completely the whole tenor of that transformation. When those people could hear that this leader was vulnerable, that was actually willing to say that she didn't know all the answers, it made a big difference, because all those people felt the same way. They didn't know how their roles were going to be affected. They didn't know what this was going to look like. So it made a huge change. That's the kind of difference. She wanted to be successful, didn't necessarily want to be right. So look for that as a signal. Look at that as a sign in your own organization. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be successful? Here's number two: distributing responsibility. Not just responsibility, but also rewards. This is something I see all the time. We don't do a good job. We actually have systems in place that sort of actively prevent agility. So here's a story. This is straight from a client I worked with last year. I'm not going to tell you the name of the company, but he was a sector lead. And he was talking to me and he said, hey, Jorgen, I get it. This is great. I understand what you're trying to do here. Optimize for flow, end-to-end perspective. Yes, yes, I get it. But what you're asking me to do here, man, is to lose 25% of my compensation. That's a really, really high ask. And I asked him, like, wait, whoa, what are you talking about? Losing 25? No, I'm not asking anything like that. They said, no, that's exactly what you're doing, because what's happening right now is that I'm doing okay with my sector, and I can see that Mary over here in the other sector, she needs my people, she needs my resources. And if I were to do the kind of things you said, I would move some of my people over to her sector because she has a higher cost of delay, and it would be better for our organization if we did this. But if I did do that, which means we would be more agile, I would not meet the goals of my sector, which means that my manager would dock me 25%, which is my bonus. Wow. And you know what? He's got a point. I can't blame him. I don't think it's fair to ask people to give up a quarter of their salary to do the right thing. And this is the case in many organizations. We have systems in place that actively prevent agility. So look for that. Look for that as a signal. What you're looking for is that incentives as well as disincentives are distributed so that everyone has a stake in optimizing for the whole. If you don't, if you have silos like that, that's a really good sign that you're not on the path. So look for that opposite. Here's number three, aiming for good enough certainty. This is hard for a lot of us, especially those of us who have sort of, well, performance driven. This is a quote that I love. This is coming from Jeff Bezos from his letter to shareholders a couple of years ago. And he says, decisions should be made with about 70% of the information you wish you had. Wait for 90% and you're too slow. I love that quote. He gets this because the idea is this, that in environments of high variability, if you are in environments with lots of VUCA, the time it takes to make a decision is more expensive than recovering from a mistake. Actually doing something, taking one action, and then recovering from it if it's wrong is a lot more productive than trying to wait and trying to get it perfect the first time because you're probably going to be wrong anyway. Jeff Bezos gets this. He understands that time is of the essence. And that means that you cannot be certain. You have to aim for that magic good enough. He sort of even quantifies it to 70%, which I think is interesting. But his point is well taken. If we wait too long, if we're trying to be so sure, if we have this analysis paralysis idea, we wait too long with too much data gathering, we're probably not going to benefit the company and we're actually going to be less agile, not more. So that one is an important one. Very difficult for a lot of us to do though, because we want to be right. We want to be having done the analysis, having done our homework. Here's number four, and I love this one, appreciating the importance of doing less work at once. So this is about organizational work in progress, organizational WIP. This is one of those things that I see again and again and again. One of my favorite graphs, what you will notice is that I'm sort of a fanboy of a lot of these old school folks from the 60s. This is one of them. Dr. John Kingman came up with this formula. This is the Kingman's Law. And what this essentially is saying is, as utilization rates go up, you get to a point where waiting times double. And this happens in environments with lots of uncertainty. If you're in environments with lots of uncertainty and variability, this formula holds true. If you're in an environment where there is no uncertainty, if things are sort of very clear, there's not a lot of uncertainty, not, things are pretty linear, this does not necessarily hold true. But in VUCA environments, this is very much true. As these utilization rates go up, as you do more things at once, your waiting times double. It becomes a super linear function to the point where you do too many things at once, you get nothing done. This is true at the personal level and also the organizational level. You see it even on your computer. If you do too many things at once, you have too many apps open, you look at your utilization rate on your CPU and it's like 95%. What happens? You get nothing done. The whole thing freezes. Same thing happens here at the organizational level. So it's critical and important not to do too many things at once. It sounds perhaps counterintuitive, but it's very true. And Steve Jobs got this. You know, what he would do every year, he would take the top 100 executives at Apple and he would say, all right, guys, we're now going to decide the top 10 things we're going to do for the next year. And he would take these people on an offsite, and they would have them duke it out. And it would be, I mean, we're talking shouting matches, testosterone flying everywhere. It's kind of a nasty situation, but ultimately they came in with 10 things and they said, okay, Steve, we decided here are the top 10 things we're going to do next year. Steve then said, I dropped the bottom 7. We're doing 3 things. Now that's focus. That's the kind of thing Steve Jobs would do. Now, I'll be the first to say I don't think Apple is doing this now at all. In fact, my opinion is I think they're going through a midlife crisis, but that's a whole different story. The point being, Apple of old were very much focused and they did not do too many things at once because they understood the idea of organizational WIP. Look for that as one of those signs. Now, organizational WIP is nice, but without knowing what to cut, that does not become so helpful. One thing is to cut things, but you need to know which of those to cut. Cost of delay is one of the favorite things I know to understand prioritization. Cost of delay, of course, from Don Reinertsen, the father of this term. He likes to call it the impact of time to life cycle profits. Essentially, what he's talking about is really the impact of not having something in production. When I talk about this concept, very often people kind of get scared and they say, oh, Jorgen, this is sort of math. You know, we're talking finance now. Yeah, sure. Okay. We're in business. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things we talk about. But then they say, well, we can't really get precise because there's so many uncertain variables here. We don't know for sure. I said, you know what? That's okay. We're not going for precision here. We're going for accuracy. And the reason that is true is because what will happen is that when you track the cost of delay, the estimated cost of delay of all the projects and initiatives you have, you will see a graph looking very much like this. And I guarantee you that's how it will look. I've done this half a dozen times now. It never fails. What you see here in this graph is on the x-axis, you see the projects. And then on the y-axis, the vertical axis here, you see the estimated cost of delay. And as you can see, this is a little bit of a Pareto chart. 80% of the cost of delay is concentrated among 20% of the projects. This happens all the time. Do you need to be super precise in this scenario? No, you don't, because it's a big difference in cost of delay. And I bet you that's the same thing happening in your organization. Understanding cost of delay can be tremendously important for you, because if you understand that, it'll be a lot easier for you also to understand which projects to cut. Typically, though, what you will see, this is not sorted by priority. Priorities are not always the same as cost of delay. Very often it will be a pet project from some executive. There will be some initiative that is very ill-defined. It's really hard for you to know why these things are considered important, but certainly economic sensibilities is very often not part of the equation. So that's one of those factors that I implore you to look at, cost of delay. If you see that happening, it's a good sign that you're about to unlock agility. Here's number 6, learning to let go of the illusion of control. This is hard for us. We like to control things. We go through education, we go through school, we get the right answer. I mean, I get it. We like to have some control. One thing that I think COVID has done for us, and that's probably a positive thing, or it's hard to think about this now, is that it has taught us how little we actually know. There's so many uncertainties, so many things we don't actually know, even though we have all the science in the world. There's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of VUCA even in that environment. The only way we can find out, though, is that we can actually learn and we can experiment and we can actually recover rather than trying to not actually have a failure in the first place. This is something that Netflix got, and they still get this very well. They understood that the point is not to create a system that never fails. If you do that, if you create a system that never fails, well, it will be very fragile and it will fail, because eventually it will fail. There's no software system that doesn't have flaws, any complex system for that matter. They understood this, so they initiated Chaos Monkey, which is an initiative where they, on purpose, will take down certain parts of the system, certain parts of the infrastructure, in an effort to see how quickly they can recover. And that's the idea. The idea is to recover gracefully rather than never failing, because that does not create resilient, robust systems. That creates fragility if you're trying to create something perfect. So that's one thing that I think they did really well. And look at this as in parts of the organization also. The idea of safe to fail experiments, the idea of making some failure. These are not catastrophic failures, but safe to fail experiments and failures. Those are cool. They teach you something. They make you a learning organization, which is critical to making this work in an agile way. And the last one, and another one of my heroes, Russell Ackoff, another dude from the 60s. He is wonderful. What he said is that we need to recognize that a system is a product of its interactions. And I love that saying. The system is a product of its interactions. When I first heard this, I was like, oh man, that sounds kind of esoteric. That's a kind of obtuse. What is he trying to say? Well, what he's saying is essentially the product, the value that comes out of the system. And imagine an organization is a system. The value here is really a function of the interactions between the teams, not the teams themselves. That's what he's saying. And that became very real for me when I started mapping out my projects. Here's a project I did a couple of years ago. I kind of mapped out what was going on. It was literally 46 weeks here before we went live, so you could tell what was going on here. But if you look at all the different week numbers here, and you can look at the different things that were happening, there's lots of handouts, lots of wait times. Every time something was happening that was actually creating value, we have a green dot, and every time there's something red, it's just wait time or waste. And what you will see here is that the agile stuff is happening here, among product development, around the engineering teams. That's sort of the agile stuff. That's where the scrum masters and the product owners and all those people are. But in all the other areas, there is not a whole lot of agile going on. What do you think will happen if I now train another scrum master, or, did TDD for all the team members in week 32 to 37? If I did that focus, what do you think would happen? Incremental improvements probably, but the real difference wouldn't really happen until I focus on the interactions between the other parts of that system. our first contact with the customer was not until week 46. Pretty sad, not very agile at all. And a lot of that is because we didn't understand the system. We didn't understand the product of the interactions, which is what Eckhoff talked to us about. And this is from the 60s, so this is not new stuff. But very often we forget to think about this as a whole. All right, those were the 7 things. I went through them pretty quickly, but now I'd like to have a little bit of feedback from you. So again, let's go menti.com, and here's the code 9092882. 9092882. This is what I'd like for you to tell me. Which of these 7 signs, and you can see the signs there, which of these are the least likely to be observed in your organization? Be honest, just look at your organization and which of these signs that are all good signs, like these are the signs we want to see if you're on track here to becoming more agile, which of these are least likely to be observed? Let's see what you say, because I want to see how this is playing out. Ooh, got a couple of good ones here already. Learning to let go of control, that's a classic. It's hard for us. We're professionals. We went to school for many years. We want to try to control these things, even though that is literally impossible. Good enough certainty comes up a little bit. Do you want to be right or successful? Yes, at the leadership level. This goes to a lot to what Peter Behrens talked about in the last talk, I think. But you could see a winner starting to emerge here. And this is something that I have seen, I want to say, almost without exception. Every time I've done this talk, the one that keeps getting the most votes is the importance of doing less work at once, organizational whip. It is the one thing that just keeps coming up, and the control part is another one that, and cost of delay are the ones I see very often. One thing that I'll say, if you just want to kind of appear to be a genius, people can hire you to be a fancy agile transformation agent. You can go in there to a company and basically slash their backlog in half. And if you do that, that alone will in fact get your whip limit down dramatically. It will get your cycle time up or down. The speed will go up. Your quality will go up, and you also will have better customer satisfaction. I mean, doing organizational whip as a first step is a wonderful way to start your transformation. But it's really good to see. I thank you for your answers here. It's really interesting for me to see that once again, organizational whip is the one that sort of wins out there. Very, very interesting. I thank you for your answers. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that this is a holistic thing that we have to look at. Organizational agility is not the same as Scrum and Agile and those kind of frameworks that we talk about. It is a holistic approach. And in my book, I talk about the 5 dimensions of agility. When I talk of technology, and some people will probably be mad at me, when I talk of technology, I talk about tools, methods, techniques, things that help us do things better and faster. Scrum, in my opinion, is a technology in this sense. XP, Jira, tools, anything that can help us get things done are very much technology in this context. This is something that we do, and we usually stop here. And the reason for that is that it's very tangible. You can be certified in this or that. You can buy this or that tool. You kind of stop there. What you forget, though, are all the other pieces that need to be part of this transformation. The organizational design. How are you organized? To what degree are you optimizing for flow across the value stream? To what degree are you making sure people don't have silos? To what degree do you make sure that we don't actually compete with each other actively, and in fact are creating impediments to agility? This is not just the work environment and the offices that we no longer work in. It's also the way we structure and organize ourselves. What about the people? What about the engagement that we have in our company? What about psychological safety? The idea that you can stand up and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. This is wrong. Stephen Elop, we're losing market share. We should not go this path anymore. How about people being able to stand up and say those kind of things? Psychological safety, there's tons of research around this, and we see it. In fact, if you look at Boeing and what's been happening there, great example of a company that did not have psychological safety. Engineers across the board saw the flaws in Boeing's design, didn't speak up, or at least were hidden from speaking up because they didn't feel safe to say so. This is critical to agility. Leadership. This goes to a lot of what Pete Behrens talked about. Growth mindset, the idea that you can actually invite failure, that you can actually be wrong, that you don't have to always be right. These are things that leaders need to start doing. It's too easy to say, oh, anyone can be a leader. Yeah, sure. I understand what you're saying. But if you're a person on the floor, it's not so easy to take the first step and make that mistake and say, hey, I'm failing fast. It's not so easy. That can be a career limiting move. Leaders need to be the ones leading here. They are the ones that can feel safe in this environment and be a good example. Show them that it's okay to not have all the answers and potentially also be wrong a couple of times and learning from it. This, again, of course, is all tied together with the culture. What we're doing here is creating a continuous improvement mindset. We're creating a learning organization. Again, not something we become, something we become more of. We are a little bit better today than we were yesterday. That's the idea. We learn every time because we know we don't have all the answers. In fact, we invite that uncertainty. We invite and embrace that idea that we don't know what we don't know. That's the core of agility, and that's why agility works so well in environments with lots of uncertainty. So that's what this looks like. Three parting thoughts, and then after that, I'll take some questions. This is the number one thing. When you look at enterprise agility, I hope you understand that this is not an easy thing. If you see people just kind of plug and play simple things like a framework or something that's already sort of made to order, you realize that that's not really going to get you there. It might get you some benefits in the beginning, I'll say that, but it's not going to get you to a truly agile organization. That's what I'm talking about when people say, oh, this can't be happening. Yes, it can, but it does require real change. Understand why you're doing that change. Don't just do it because your competition is doing it. Don't just do it because the neighbor is doing it or because it's cool. Do it because it's solving a particular business problem. Is it about speed to market? Is it about quality? Is it about adaptability? Whatever it is, make sure that that is the reason you're doing it and not going agile per se. It is not a means to an end. The idea here, or the agile itself, is the means to an end. It's not the end itself. So be cognizant of that. This is one of those things that really irks me. Everything agile is great and everything great is agile. When people say that, I just break out into hives. The thing is, there are things where agile is not the way to go. There are environments where agile isn't the right way to go. If you are in environments with not that much uncertainty, when you are in environments where things are clearly defined, you know exactly who the customer doesn't change his or her mind that often, maybe because of regulation or some other reason, then being very agile isn't necessarily giving you all those benefits. Agile thrives in environments of uncertainty. It thrives when you don't know have all the answers. The great thing for agile is that the world itself is changing to be more VUCA based. I think that's the argument I'm making earlier. So the world itself is changing and becoming more uncertain, which is again why agile is so important. But if you're not in that environment, then yeah, I'll concede there's probably less environments now that are certain. But if you are in that environment, that isn't necessarily meaning that agile is the best way to go. Like if your goal is cost efficiency, for instance, squeezing the most you can out of people's units, well, then maybe agile isn't the way to go. Ensure that your operational strategy is supporting your business strategy. That's the point. And okay, I don't want to hammer this too much, but this is the thing. This is not a destination. It is not something you become, it's something you become more of. If you improve 1% every single week over time, that will accumulate to be quite significant. So agility is all about learning. It's about being a little bit better today than you were yesterday. It's not a destination. I think you probably heard that many, many times before. And I know sometimes that can be hard for executives. Oh, we're doing this thing and it never ends. Exactly. It's a lifestyle. It's not a diet. So here's some resources for you. These are all great books. I did put my my own book on there, and I know that's really bad form, but hey, it's not a bad book. You should look it out if you have a chance. But there's some really good books here. I totally love Don. I'm a fan. The Principles of Product Development Flow is awesome. Skin in the Game, Nassim Taleb. Anything you can write or read about him is phenomenal. Lots of other great books on there too. And I know that these slides will be available to you, so check them out and start reading. Um, and that's all I had. I'm a bit of a nerd, as you probably could figure out. So if you want to talk to me, send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to chat. You see the email here, Jorgen at comparativeagility.com. If you're interested in sort of seeing how you're doing in terms of agility at the team, program, or organizational level, use our tool. You can benchmark yourself, see how that's going. And then, of course, if you're interested in the book, you know where to get that. So thank you. That was my spiel, and I'll be happy to take some questions if there are any.
Feel free to post questions in the chat, or we can unmute you.
Maybe they're saying, "Oh, this is obvious. There's no questions." That's cool too. I think I see Martin, man. Martin, you were there in the first session, weren't you? Martin Stahl from Berlin. You're a crazy man. 9 hours later, you're still there, man. Brother, this is great. Oh, you got the Nokia. Oh, man. Oh, you warmed my heart. That's awesome. That's great, man. I bought my son a Nokia, by the way. So yeah, he's continuing the tradition. That's great.
Yeah, I think Martin's doing a third time zone today.
He's amazing, that guy.
That's commitment, guys.
I'm impressed, man. Well, after this, isn't it another group
There
of
is a
people?
Latin America one followed right in 9 minutes, actually. So Martin, challenge yourself to.
He's like, that's it, man. That's phenomenal. Very cool. Good. Well, hey, it didn't seem like there's any questions. That's great, man. I'm ready to hit the sack if that's the case. But I'm just glad you guys listened. I hope you. Oh.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
I have one question, right? You're saying that these are the 7 points that we have to get to in order to say that we're fully agile. Sorry, but
that you're on your way to becoming fully agile. Yeah.
Okay, on your way to. Sorry about that. The thing about is majority of the companies that I know of, they're stuck in the politics. It has a lot to do with politics. It has a lot more to do with politics than being agile when you really start on that journey. So when I hear you speak, it sounds more like you're not really easing them into these decisions. It's more of it's either you are or you're not, right? So what about the people who are stuck in the politics that you have to pull out of the politics before you can get to that point? What's your take on that?
Yeah, really, really good question. And I've been there too. I've been in those kind of environments. Well, first, this is why I think executive support is so important, at that C level, because once executives at that level say that this is something we're doing, a lot of the politics kind of tend to sort of vanish, because now if you think about what politics is, essentially it's just people positioning themselves, trying to do well in the organization based on non-value added type of work. But if you have a corporate initiative, if your executive says, this is what we're doing, and all the different people, whether you are in HR, finance, facilities, if your work is directly aligned to agile or agility, and you want to show that executive that you're actually adding value towards that really important corporate initiative, then that politic will actually try to support you. It will actually do the kind of things that you're trying to do in an agile way.
What about the bad apple? Because you always have that person who has that uncle, right?
Yeah.
Who, at the end of the day, they're like, oh well, they have to do it this way. You have the C-level executives who tell them, oh yeah, you have to do it this way, but then their uncle is a C-level executive, so they personally are pushing around the politics and saying, well, I don't have to do it that way. And they're putting in that wrench, that right. Monkey that just jumps around and throws the wrench anywhere they see fit, right?
Yeah.
What about that guy?
Yeah.
What about,
great.
You can go and definitely talk and go up to the sea and everybody's, kumbaya. But what about the guy who's like, all right, fine, let me just throw a wrench in here?
I'll give you a really concrete example of this. In fact, I went through that very thing, and it's in the book as well. And it was actually a really tricky situation, because what this dude, he was one of those sort of top-down kind of guys. He was a director, and I think what he realized, he didn't like this whole agile thing, because he had to actually give up some power. And he did not like that idea at all. So what he did, he took me to his office. He was very, very open about it, kind of aggressive, but he was very open. And he said, hey, Jorgen, just so you know, I'm a director here. I just want you to know that. And I always deliver on time. I always deliver on the budget. And I always deliver on scope. As long as I do those 3 things consistently, nothing's going to happen with me. You can put all the Scrum Masters and Agile bullshit on me. It doesn't matter. If I do those 3 things, I am safe and I'm good to go. That's what he said. I was like, damn, he might have a point. Well, here's what happened. He started, when I tell you this story, you're going to think I'm making it up. It's totally true. He started visiting people's scrums, daily scrums. And he would go there and he would look at the scrum board and he would say, that scrum board is not at a 45-degree angle. And the guys would say, well, we have a 2-week scrum here or sprint here. And, we're having some issues. We're working it through. I mean, yes, it goes up and down a little bit. I mean, we know how these burn downs look, right? And he said, no, this is not acceptable. You're going to have to deal with me. And he kept doing this. He kept being very top down. What actually ended up happening is the Scrum Master started having 2 books. They had what they called Kevin Agile. This is the name of the guy, Kevin Agile, K Agile, they called it. And in that world, when he came around, there was a perfect 45-degree angle. And he said, okay, perfect, I'm done, later. And then when he took off, they said, okay, guys, let's do the real thing. And then they would actually show what was actually happening. So they went to me and they told me what was going on. Terrible. I talked then to HR and I said, guys, we have an inflection point. You said that you were serious about this thing. Look at what this executive is doing right now. That person is actively killing agility, actively undermining everything we stand for. How serious are we about this? So what they did is they said, hey, why don't we have a conversation with Kevin? And they did. They put him on an improvement plan. This is a director. They put him on an improvement plan.
That really happens.
It did really happen. And when that didn't work, he got 3 months to change and he didn't change his ways. He got fired. And I tell you, that made all the difference because suddenly now people said, whoa, they're right. They're actually real about this. They're actually going to change the organization. They're not going to accept that kind of management anymore. All the other managers perked up and they were like, okay. It changed everything. This is again why you need C-level support. This wouldn't have happened if I had some VP of quality supporting it.
Yeah, because that thing is a rarity probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
They
it
back
can
their
work.
C-levels.
And it can happen. And if you think it's important enough, C-level should care. And what I'm trying to say here in terms of the argument, C-level does care. They're getting it now. We're at this moment. I think COVID could, in fact, be an accelerant. People are starting to see that the old way of working doesn't work anymore. We need to be more adaptive.